So today's topic is 5 money-making ideas when planting cover crops. And I just have to say that I chose 5. I could have said 25, but we're going to talk about 5. I have 2 bonus ones I'm going to add in there because I just had to throw them in. And when we talk about cover crops, it's very clear that the most often asked question in cover cropping is, do cover crops pay? I think almost everyone knows their benefits. There's no issue there. But can we be able to use cover crops and be able to take advantage of their benefits, but knowing it's an additional expense, can we make them pay? Because at the end of the day, they're going to have to pay their way. I am a farmer. I understand this, and I understand that you have to make this work. So all that being said, I want to give us some ideas today. And at the end, if there's other things you want to add, I certainly would be really open to hear, because I know there's a lot of things out there. So the things I'm going to cover today, and these aren't necessarily in any given order. I want to make that clear. But there's one of the more important ones I think that can make a difference. So the first one is using precision planters, which a lot of farmers have, to be able to lower your seeding rates, which obviously helps them be able to pay their way better. Another one that is definitely deserves to be in the top 5 is planting as soon as possible after the cash crop harvest. And we're in farming. We all know there's some limitations in there, but I will tell you that what I have seen is farmers that have seen the benefits of cover crops, they'll make it happen. The other thing is shop around for price and service. And then I crossed out price and put in value. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And that's something that sometimes some farmers overlook. And of course, using legumes for N or nitrogen fixation is important. And then understanding how to create a cost-saving mix. And the reason I put this in is sometimes there's a perception out there that if I grow a mixture of species, that it's going to cost me more. And yeah, it could. It certainly could. But that being said, if it's done right, it may actually cost you less. And that's why we're discussing that topic today in my topic here of 5 ways to make money using cover crops. So let's talk about the first one, using a lower seeding rate by using a precision planter. And I'm talking about planters that are normally used for corn or soybeans. And particularly if farmers have a 15-inch planter or a narrow row planter, they are much more conducive to planting cover crops. And there even are cases where I know of farmers who are planting cover crops in 30-inch rows if their objective is to soak up leftover nitrogen or something like that you don't need a drill to do that. If you're going after something like compaction alleviation, then you probably want to stick with a drill to keep the plants closer. So that's just why I am listing this here, because there's a lot of 15-inch planters out here now with all the 15-inch beans that are out. And there are now plates that are available, seeding discs, I should say, for vacuum planters. And I covered this in one of my other webinars before, but being able to plant mixes is now possible with most of the popular brands. And there's seed discs out there that are able to be purchased to be able to use in these planters. So with a precision planter, better seed placement. They're just designed to better because of row cleaners and better depth control with gauge wheels and so forth. I think row cleaners are a big part of it here now. There are some drills that have row cleaners on as well. It's kind of rare, but being able to plant like right after the combine with heavy residues can be a challenge for some drills. and because of that, you have to increase your seeding rate to accommodate not getting all the seeds in the ground. So that's why planting with a precision planter is sometimes going to be a cost-saving thing to do. Another thing is some farmers they've sold their drills, and all they have left is a precision planter. And so this brings that into play where they can use that on more acres. And I have here too is they can control seed spacing better. And this is primarily with using a seed that you can singulate. And I know radishes are one of the best ones to do this with, where you can actually use Milo plates, and that they were able to fit in the seed disc for those type of cash crops. And then you can literally singulate those seeds. And for instance, a drill rate for straight radish, maybe 6 to 8 pounds per acre. If you singulate with a precision planter in 15-inch rows, you can get down into the 2 to 4 pounds per acre, essentially cutting your seeding rates in half. And if all your objective is to soak up leftover nitrogen, you can literally use a 30-inch planter with radishes and place those seeds 4 inches apart. That's only 2 pounds per acre. Your seed cost is less than $4 an acre just to accomplish that. With a drill, you probably, because you won't get the best spacing at that low seeding rate, you're going to have to put more seeds on there. So clearly this is an advantage if you have a precision planter that's not being used. You might have to spend a little money for seed discs to get it up to speed, but they will pay for themselves really quickly. And also the ability to have wider planters. A lot of these planters are very wide, or wider than most drills. They can be in some situations. So that's just another reason to use a precision planter. So my second point here then talks more about planting as soon as possible after the cash crop harvest. And I like to say that I like to follow the combine. And sometimes we can literally do that. And sometimes within a day is fine. But every day counts. And this next statement here, one day in September is like a week or more in October. It's all about growing degree days. And so especially when we are in that planting window, when we're still in that good, ideal planting window for whatever we're planting, every day counts. And I have seen a 2-week difference in planting date equate into double the amount of biomass production in the fall and in the spring if it's something that overwinters, like cereal rye or something like that. So just a 2-week difference can more than double the biomass. Now, biomass doesn't automatically turn into yield, but what I have seen, especially when we're using legumes in front of corn, planting a cover crop 2 weeks sooner gave me 7 bushels more of corn the next year. So that in itself right there is going to pay for the seed and probably even the the planting part of it, and then plus all the other benefits you get out of cover crops. So every day counts. This is clearly one of the most important aspects of trying to make money with cover crops, is to take advantage of every day. Now we can manipulate that a little bit beyond the weather by using shorter season corn hybrids or soybean varieties. And so I'm kind of listing that in the context of this point here. There are some decent short season corn hybrids and soybean varieties that planting 5 to 10% of your acres, getting them off 1 week to 10 days earlier, certainly can play into this whole thing of getting your cover crops planted sooner. And that's something you have to work with your local seed people on, someone who knows what they're doing in your area. You don't just pick the shortest variety out of the book, or tell the salesman, I want your shortest variety. You have to have something that does work decent in your area to maintain yield. And I've talked about this before. I've done now 6 years of research on this, and I'm very comfortable with a couple of corn hybrids and soybean varieties where I'm planting them short season, planting them early, getting them off in middle of September, so I have a good opportunity for my cover crops to grow. So using short-seeded corn hybrids and varieties is very important in here. So then a couple more points here is, this is just to help farmers to think. So if you're a farmer, or if you're training farmers, or you're helping with farmers, it costs the same for the seed and the establishment, no matter when you plant. And sometimes farmers don't think about that, but it does. So if you can plant early, right behind the combine, or make that happen, hire someone else to run that tractor, or use, it's a good way to break in a young family member or a retired neighboring farmer. I do value getting cover crops put in right, but it's certainly a great opportunity for someone new to get started and actually doing tractor work, planting cover crops. So that's just some suggestions along that line. And of course, as I said, this whole thing here is maximizing the growing degree days that we have. Now, these past couple years have been pretty decent in the fall. We've had nice growing weather in large areas of the country. But regardless, taking advantage and every day counts is just critical in being able to do this correctly. So I have a picture coming up here that really shows just the difference of what 8 days can make. And this is getting into, and I'm from southeastern Pennsylvania, just to give you an idea. But on the right-hand side was planted September the 29th, and on the left was October the 7th. This picture was taken in November later on, but you can just see the difference right there on how that was. In this instance, the reason I stopped was because it started raining, and so I planted until I couldn't go anymore, and then came back later on. It was a very wet period of time there this particular year. So. But you can just see the difference there. That's just 8 days difference going into the winter. That's basically how it went into the winter. Now, I don't have yield data off this exact spot here, how it made up. But the point is, every day counts in the fall. And typically, what I have seen is farmers who have got into cover crops for 1 to 3 or 5 years, once they start realizing the benefits, they make it happen. I can think of many examples of that, farmers in my neighborhood and farmers I've talked to who said, you know what, I have combines to chase with the grain carts and with trucks, and there's no one around to plant cover crops. But once they have seen the value, they find somebody do it, or they get it done somehow, some way. So just being able to understand the benefits and then doing something about it is really, really important. The next point is shop around for the best price and service. Now, you notice I crossed out price and put in value. And I would say most farmers tend to shop on price, and that's still part of my point here, what I'm trying to say. But you really have to think about value. And what do I mean by value? What is value? I was, as many of you know, was in the seed business for from 2000. Well, I started actually in 2004 until 2016, and so I have some experience of being on that side of this whole issue here. So I'm going to list a few things here. One of them is the germination. So if you're pricing out cover crops, if I'm on the phone and I'm buying a significant quantity, I'd like to know what the germination is. If it's cereal rye, is it 90% or is it 80%? In this case, 80% would be unacceptable unless the price is really cheap. I literally have bought a cereal rye myself here from someone, got it tested, and the germ was 80%. That's low. So even though the price was, I'll say, fair, I felt after I got home and looked at the tag that I didn't get a good value for that quote-unquote fair price. So know what the germ is, and if you really want to be particular, and this is for the people who are taking this up to the next level or two, you get your cover crop seeds a month or two ahead of when you need them. Do your own germination tests. And I think most people understand this, but you can take a little test of a couple ounces of seed that may represent a tractor trailer load and get that tested. And there's a few quote unquote tricks of the trade out there within the seed industry and how to make the germ look good for a particular particular cover crop or whatever. So if you're really concerned about this and get your cover crop seeds a month or two early, you can do your own germ test, and it's not really that hard. You can count 100 seeds out, put them in a paper towel, fold it up a couple times, put a little bit of water in, put it in a Ziploc bag, and 3 to 6 days later, go back and look at it and count them out. How many germed? Is it close to what the tag was? If it's an ultra high germ, maybe you can use a little lower seeding rate. If it's a really low germ, you might want to go back to the company and say, hey, I did this little homemade test here. You might want to check your germ again or something like that. So I know this sounds a little bit picky, but you can adjust your seeding rates, and if you have big acres, you can maybe gain something out of that. I actually heard an example of a seed company who had a very, very good germ on their product, and they actually listed and labeled their seed company below what that germination was by 4 points, and because it was almost too good to be true. Well, wouldn't you believe the Department of Agriculture did a spot test, and the germ came out, as they said, extremely high, but they went back, and I don't know if they fined them or anything, but since they were out of the spec of what that was to be, even though it was on the high side, they said you're not allowed to do that, because if a farmer is planting his seeds based on the germ, he'd be able to manipulate his planting rates to be maximizing them. So I thought that was interesting to hear that. Now that brings us to the next conversation here. The next point is the PLS, or the pure live seeds, and that's just another term in the context of germination here, so that when you get your seed, you will see the germination, which is probably one of the most important ones, and then you'll see the purity. And the purity has to do with of the amount of seed that's in that bag, how much of it is what you bought. In other words, there is a tolerance to some what they call inert matter, which could be anything, could be soil, it could be other things, or it could be chaff and things like that. Some seeds are hard to clean. They're just going to have inert matter. You can't get it 100% pure. Very rarely can you do that. But also weed seeds are listed, and there's also noxious weed seeds that are listed. Some noxious weed seeds can be used or are allowed under a certain tolerable level. But what is the pure live seeds in that product that you're buying? Not all of the companies are going to put this on the tag, but you can kind of figure it out when you take the germination rate and the purity rate. So that should be, the purity should be, on most everything, should be 95 to 98% at least of seeds. So again, just a little thing, but this can make a difference here. So this is all about the value. And then I put in here the service. What's the service that the company you're buying from give you? Are they just selling seeds, and if you have a problem, they don't know anything? To me, that is a way, when you lock yourself into a purchase and a price, is there anything else coming along with that in regard to service? And what I'm really meaning here is if you do have questions on maybe how to best grow this cover crop, when is the seeding dates for my area and different things like that. So I think that's really important to know in the context of the value of the seed. And then I have in here brand versus variety, and I'm not going to spend very much time on this because it's pretty complex, but a brand is simply whatever the seed company puts in that bag and what they represent. Whatever they advertise it as, the traits that it does, the good things that that certain cover crop does, that's it. A variety, on the other hand, is more straightforward. It was a variety that was bred, and this is the variety. The variety will probably be listed on the tag somewhere. It may actually be the name of the type of cover crop you got. It may be that name, or it may not. It can be something else. But when you buy a variety, it's a little more clear then what you're getting when you do that. And granted, a lot of times varieties cost more, but you may be more sure what you're getting, and it may have desirable traits that are worth the value. So spend a little bit of extra time on this, but I think this is a key in being able to understand how to save money on cover crop, how to be able to figure this all into your planning. Okay, number 4 is to use legumes for nitrogen fixation. And I got to admit, I wasn't sure if I wanted to put this one in or not, because right now the price of nitrogen is not that expensive. But I would say what I tell people is we live in a volatile world, and the price of nitrogen is probably not anything that any of us have influence on. Now, the amount of nitrogen needed, we have absolute the opportunity to have influence on. So what I'm saying right now, and the reason I did keep this in here, is I would encourage all farmers, and those of you who are training farmers, why not try to use some legume cover crops to be able to understand how they work on your farm? Because when that year comes, and I think everyone will agree it could happen, when the price of nitrogen increases, you'll be ready to be able to use legume cover crops to be able to offset that price of nitrogen. So when you have a high nitrogen fixing crop like hairy vetch, which you can kind of see pictured there, or a crimson clover, or the Balanza clover that's becoming more popular now, and there's Austrian winter peas. There's quite a few of them out there, of the more prolific nitrogen producers. You can, if you do things right, you can kind of justify the cost of the seed and planting it based on the nitrogen it produces. But it's almost a wash with the current prices of seed and with nitrogen. Now, I would argue that the cover crops are going to give you so many more benefits that it's unquestionable. If I can, I'm going to go with the legume cover crop, reducing some nitrogen. Even if I would pencil out the value of nitrogen production of my legume is the same as purchasing nitrogen, every day of the week I'm going to be using that legume for my nitrogen source because of all the other benefits that I get out of it. That a little difficult to put dollars and cents behind it, but I know that it does help my bottom line, my investment in my soil. So I see this point right now as more of to get started, but when that year comes and the price of nitrogen goes high, I've made the statement so many times now, if the price of nitrogen would go up 25% or so, there may not be enough cover crop, legume cover crop seeds to be able to meet the demand if that does occur. Now, I hope it doesn't occur, but then again, you want to be prepared if it does occur. So that is why I put that in here with using legumes as one of the top 5 money-making ideas. Now, my number 5 idea here is understanding how to create a cost-saving mix. And since mixes are very popular these days, frequent comment I get is, well, doesn't that drive up the cost of your seed? And the answer is, well, it might, but I would say it doesn't have to. So first of all, what are your objectives? so many times we got to get back to this question. What are your objectives? What are you trying to do? Then that leads up to then what's our planting window, and then what species can we use? So within the context of this point here, I put in swapping species. And what I mean by that is certain species can fluctuate in price from time to time. And I'll just give an example of crimson clover, hairy vetch. Some of those, they can be somewhat volatile. If you go back over the last 10 to 15 years, there's been some years that vetch has been a lot more expensive, and other years it's been cheaper, and the same with crimson clover. So when we're thinking about cost savings in a mix, when I'm using my example here of crimson clover and hairy vetch, which are two good legume producing species, if the price of vetch is high and the price of crimson clover is low, I may give more to my mix of the crimson clover and less of the hairy vetch. And maybe that'll flip-flop sometimes. So if you're really looking at cost savings, you want to check every year what the prices are of the specific species that you're putting in your mix. And just limit the one, or maybe replace it with another one. Now, you may be giving up a few things here and there. That has to enter into it all. But the whole idea of swapping out species, again, this is fine-tuning our cost savings, but it's a valid point. Now, the other reason that's more impactful, and this leads to using lower seeding rates, is the synergies that happen when you start mixing species. And I think that's fairly common and accepted knowledge now. There's been quite a few studies done that support this, just from biomass measurements. But I like to say that 1 + 1 = 3 in the context of cover cropping species. So when you start mixing species, you can start reducing the rates of each individual species lower than the percentage of those species would be if you divide it out according to the amount of species in a mix. So I don't know if you could follow me right there, but let's just use radish for an example. If we're going to use the normal seeding rate of radish of 6 pounds per acre drilled, if I'm going to use 3 species and radish is a part of it, I know that radishes are very aggressive. So I could say, well, I take 6 and divide it by 3, and that's 2. So I should plant 2 pounds per acre in this mix. I would say no, probably closer to 1 pound of radish in that mix would be the best way to do that. Now, I could give you other examples, and sometimes you have to, again, go back up to the top here. What are your objectives? If it's compaction alleviation, then I might want to stay at, in this my example here, I might want to stay at 2 pounds of radish, or maybe just bump up a little bit more than that, because they're really good at compaction alleviation. But I want to maybe have a little annual ryegrass in there to help with that objective as well. And maybe I want to just put a little oats in just to help protect it over the winter, a little bit more biomass in the fall, or what have you. So I'm just saying here, real broad stroke, seeding rates of the individual species can be lower than you will think. Now, I've seen different formulas out there. I could give you formulas, but frankly, you need to try it yourself on your field. I have taken a mix that I saved and planted it every week for 4 weeks straight during the September 15th to October the 15th. The exact same mix in the same field. And by the time November came around, you would have thought that that mix was different each time, just looking at it. And the only difference was the time of year. In this case, it was only 1 week apart. So, again, what is our objectives? And when we start making up our mixes, we've had a talk on this here, one of our webinars is more specifically about how to design mixes and so forth. You can go back and watch that if you care to. I'm just going to say now, my advice is to try something based on this very basic instructions that I gave here, and then you tweak after that what you see like for the following year and so forth, because every farm, every field actually could be a little bit different. So as I stated on the outset, I couldn't kind of contain it down to just 5, so I had to throw some bonuses in here. And I'm not going to talk about this a whole lot, but grow your own cover crop seed can be a significant cost savings. Most farmers have combines, and you can do the easy ones like cereal rye, triticale, and that. But this here is actually a picture of radishes that I was harvesting on my farm in Pennsylvania, and I'm just telling you, that's no longer done. There's 2 reasons. We don't have the right weather for it, and number 2 is we don't have the right combines. There's a reason why the majority of the seeds are grown in Oregon. It's because they have, number 1, the weather that accommodates good seed growing, and number 2, they have the infrastructure in place. Like, for instance, a radish combine, you almost have to put $30,000 into it just to get it ready to do radishes. So there are some cover crops that aren't really accommodating for a lot of farmers, but there are quite a few out there that are. So if you can do that and get them cleaned and do that, this certainly can be a cost-saving method. Now I want to wrap up here today by listing what I think may be, and this is my bonus number 2 here, and you guys have heard me say this a lot, but I had to put it in. This may be the most cost-saving idea. It's maybe more of a mindset for when you plant cover crops, and that's treat your cover crops like your cash crops. And I say this every time I give a talk, I believe, almost every time. But when again, it's the mindset here. And if you think back, everything I said today could be funneled through this statement. Farmers are really keyed into doing a good job at planting their cash crops, getting the good seed, getting the right seed for cash crops. They spend a lot of time and effort doing that. And if you want to save money or make money with cover crops, you're going to have to accept that level of management. And again, it's getting into that cover crop mindset is the foundation of being able then to make money with cover crops. This is why I feel that farmers are, once they get 3 to 5 years into cover crops, they no longer push the pencil to see if that cover crop literally paid that year. They have experienced some of the benefits that some are, they're intangible. You can't identify dollars and cents with everything, but they know it's good for the soil. They see a difference in the soil, and they are doing a good job at maximizing their use. And I'll just say one little thing here. One of the frustrations I see with when cover crops get subsidized, and I'm not against subsidizing and putting money out there for guys to get started, but I think it should be limited to those who are started, is they don't take care of it. They basically just want to throw the seeds out there, collect the money, and hope for the best. But when you're treating your cover crops like your cash crops, I think that is probably the best way to be able to make money out of the process. So in summary, get your questions ready here, but in summary, I'm going to open up the lines here soon. Using a lower seeding rate by using a precision planter. That doesn't affect everybody, but it affects a lot of people. Plant as soon as possible after cash crop harvest. That everyone could take advantage of that. Shop around for the best value and service when you're buying your seeds. Use legumes for nitrogen fixation. If you don't feel that pencils out on a nitrogen basis, I've just suggested get a little practice now growing some legumes, because one of these days the price of nitrogen will probably creep up. Then understand how to do a cost-saving mix. And my two bonuses were grow your own cover crop seed and treat your cover crops like your cash crops. So I'm going to, with that, I'm going to open it up here that anyone could ask the question. Sure, there's probably some questions. And also, if you have another idea you would like to add, I mean, there's, again, like I said at the very beginning, I could have probably listed 25 here, but these are the ones I wanted to focus on today. So who has a question or a comment?
Hey, Steve, it's Brent.
Yes, Brent.
I would just like to add in that, you know, when you're asking or you're telling others that, you know, growing your own cover crop seed is a way to save money, just be careful that they're not growing a protected variety.
Correct.
Because, you know, there are varieties of rye or triticale, and, you know, that's a good way to get yourself in trouble by stealing someone else's genetics.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up, Brent. I have a whole topic on that, how to grow your own cover crop seed legally. So go back and look at that webinar. But thanks for bringing it up, because I want to be clear here that it is not fair to a company that spends thousands, and I'm talking, you know, I know what it costs to bring a cover crop. I know what it costs to bring a cover crop variety to market, and it's in the $20,000 to $50,000 to $100,000 range. It's not fair if people steal that and just use it and sell it to their neighbor or whatever. So point well taken.
Where that's happening right now is in Michigan. You've got growers producing their own nematode control radish varieties.
I see.
And so the signal that in breeders is, don't send your newest best material here or it'll get stolen.
That's right. Well, I'll just mention really quickly on that, some of the varieties, new varieties coming out now are DNA tested. That if there is a concern that is happening, they can actually go back and do the DNA and just see. So, yeah. So I see
stuff. We've got DNA markers. So, you know, if we suspect, then we have a way of verifying.
Yep. Right. Dan, I see your mic's on.
Yes, Steve. Comment. I don't know if this is an idea that I think is needed, but it may be too complicated. But, you know, we pay a lot of attention to corn with growing degree days.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
We don't do that much with cover crops.
Right.
And I really think that we need to have, in fact, I'm thinking about developing a website that use the local weather station,
right,
and use 40 degrees as the low temperature, and because like this year we've had a very cool fall.
Okay.
And combined with the late harvest, we're really lacking a lot of cover crops that can get planted across the Midwest. And again, I haven't really crunched the numbers yet, but what I've seen is, you know, we can get the average, but then also looking at the range. What was last year? What was 2 years? I mean, every year seems to be a little bit different like this, both in the fall and in the spring. And it may be too much information from some growers, but at the same time, I think it would give us a better insight on just what kind of a priority to plant an earlier maturing corn and soybean crop. Just, you know, trying to, again, basically looking at the odds and trying to improve those odds.
No, I totally agree, and actually I have a collection of a few different, I'll call them experiments, research, where they actually looked at growing degree days in the fall, and they had, the one that was done in Virginia somewhere, they had about, I think, a dozen or so cover crops, and it was interesting to see the biomass produced by each in the fall according to the growing degree days. So I I'll support your idea there, Dan.
Okay. The only caveat there, you also have to add if it's too dry to get the cover crop germinated, then you don't start the clock.
Right. You don't start the clock until it germinates. Essentially, yeah. The planting date can be different than that. That's for sure. No, I think that's good. Yeah. Any other people have comments or questions regarding how to make money with planting cover crops? Is there any other ideas out there? I know there are, but maybe you just want to mention something that you were just wishing you could say. Anyone else have a comment on that?
Well, Steve, this is Dan again. Yeah. I think one on your legume. Obviously, if like corn is the next crop, then certainly a legume. But adding a little bit to the mix, just from a standpoint of diversity,
right?
I don't think a person could go wrong with that.
No, and I agree. I just kind of use that as an example there because I personally would always have another type of a species, meaning a non-legume or grass type species mixed in. That being said, if corn is my next crop, I'm going to lean heavily on legumes because nitrogen is what I need. And I will say this, again, what you always say, Dan, it depends. Because if you have a very, I'll just say a dead soil that you want to bring back to life, you don't see any earthworms, you don't see much biological activity, growing a mix is very helpful, of course, but I have seen highly biological soil, which I've had to do, I've had to almost cut back in my legumes now because the critters and the earthworms eat everything up, and because it's so digestible in the spring. So if I'm going to corn next year, yeah, I'm still weighting it heavy toward legumes, but not as much as I used to, partly as my organic matter is higher now. So once you get into the system, your mix can change and all that. And that's, I know we're getting into details here, but it is something that does occur over time.
Yep.
So, other people have any comments? How can we make money using cover crops? I see John's on from New York. Do you have any comments? How do you feel you're making money, or anybody else? I see Brad's on. I see John's on too. So why don't you go ahead?
Yes,
all right,
this is
Steve.
Brad. Just sorry.
Go ahead,
just
John.
a quick question about.
Yep. Go ahead, John.
All right. Sometimes we put a lot of manure on when we do cover crops, even if it's just rye, and it really seems to grow really well. Mm-hmm. But sometimes we don't put any on, and cover crops seem to be lethargic and not growing. I wonder if it would pay to put some nitrogen on to speed up the growth a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, that topic comes up once in a while, and again, I think it's coming back to what are you trying to accomplish? Since your farm probably does get manure, maybe not every year, of course, as you mentioned, maybe in your case, without knowing anymore, if you're just trying to, if you have enough biomass for erosion control or just to keep some biological life in the soil, I would question the need for additional, we'll just say fertilizer, nitrogen, or whatever, to make that happen. Now, if it's a case where you're trying to break up soil compaction in a poor soil, you might want to add, if you don't have manure here now, as you suggested, you might want to add some nitrogen in order for that cover crop, like a radish or an annual ryegrass, to be able to really do its thing and to be able to grow and get down there and open up the soil. That would be my response to that, to the answer there. But if you're saying your cover crop is lethargic and it's not accomplishing what you want it to do, well, then maybe you might want to consider putting on a little nitrogen. I think the chance of you getting that back is fairly high, but you can't guarantee it because there's a lot of variables can go into that. So is that helpful? Is that a helpful answer?
Yeah.
Yeah, very good.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yes.
Steve,
Go ahead, Dan.
Steve, you could have just said it depends.
I know, but that gets us off the hook too quick.
Yeah.
Anyway, Brad, go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, just a question about, I guess, picking the plates for precision, for planting and precision planting. What are some of the guidelines that you use as far as size? And if you're planting a mix in there, you said that works pretty well. Maybe some pointers on picking a plate that would utilize that the best.
I know of only one aftermarket manufacturer that is making plates for John Deere, Kinsey, and I think Precision Planting is the next one in line. I'm not sure where they're at. It's a company called Peridot from Indiana. I will put their website, I'll put it in my email with the link to this webinar so that you can all get it, and put it on Facebook. I wrote it down here. So they have the plates that are designed to be able to plant mixes in vacuum type planters. So Peridot, it's just in case you're trying to write it down, it's literally looks like Peridot. It's kind of like a French way of saying it. Peridot. And I know that they're just working on marketing and stuff right now. I'm not sure. I'll go on their website and find the page that talks about their plates, their seeding discs. So that's really where it's at right now. The exception is if you're planting some, if you happen to have that's a company also that has backing plates for a Kinsey brush meter, if anybody has that. But as I indicated earlier, you can plant radishes with a small milo plate or a sugar beet plate. You can plant peas, of course, with a soybean plate. And just a pea radish every other row has been kind of a popular concept that most farmers have the soybean plates. You might not have a sugar beet or a milo plate, and don't expect your dealer to have those plates on hand if you're not in those areas those crops are growing, but they'll get them in for you if that's what you want to do. So, but as far as the mixes, as far as I know, for vacuum plates, Peridot is the only one making them at this point. If there's anybody knows of it, other ones, let me know. So, yeah, I see Avery Shepard's on, and I know you just joined the group. Do you have any questions, Avery? Anyone else have any questions?
Well, Steve, this is Dan,
Yeah.
and I don't know if it's a question now or if this is a potential other topic. But like I mentioned, we had a lot of cover crops that didn't get planted this fall. And depending upon where you're located, I think that there is some potential for frost seeding, early spring.
Sure.
I mean, even something as simple as oats. Anyway, it's just I'm trying to crunch through and try to figure out the options. We've got some folks that have asked me just, what can we frost seed and that type of thing.
Well, you just gave me an idea. I'm going to have to talk about that. And it's one of my topics coming up here. If it was, I personally have all my cover crops planted. We had a great fall here, but if I didn't have my cover crops planted, I would be thinking of actually, here we are, it's the beginning of December, but now we've kind of crossed into a threshold, whereas for a lot of the parts of the country, it's gonna be cold and the ground's gonna be frozen. I would say I would recommend this to pretty much anyone. Even from now on, you could still plant cereal rye, but we're getting to the time where you can start thinking about planting like a spring oats. Even a hairy vetch now, It's maybe a little bit early for that, but I planted hairy vetch in January, first week of January. Once we had some the ground opened up and I could get some in middle of December. Peas, I'll just tell you this: peas do not work. They're a larger seed. They don't seem to work to plant like that. And the concept is called freeze seeding. So either the ground is dry enough and it's plantable. That happens a few times, or sometimes it's freeze. There's been some rain. It's somewhat moist, but if you happen to get a night that before the ground like really freezes up, if you happen to get a night that only gets down to like 25 degrees or just enough that it freezes that you can actually drive on the field without getting muddy, but it's not that deep that you can't cut down through the frost or the top quarter inch is frozen. That is a tactic, Dan, that you might want to put out there. And it may not present itself this winter, but it may. It happens once in a while. I've done it a couple times where I've literally planted through frozen ground. One night I started at 11 p.m. and planted till 2 a.m. and the temperature was dropping, and I started to see the colders start to pop up out of the ground where it was freezing enough that they couldn't stay in anymore. That's when I quit. But I'm just saying that's an option that may occur to get some seeds in the ground, because what I have found then is you may have up to 8 to 12 inches of growth by the first or second week of May, and maybe those fields can be planted last, then that you can take advantage of some growth. So annual ryegrass is another one that you could start thinking about planting soon. I mean, do you agree with that, Dan? You've done a lot of work with annual ryegrass.
Oh, I think so. The big question, though, I think that because you're always looking at, are you getting your money back?
Right.
And,
right. I know.
And so again, it's, I think, along with how to get the seed planted, but then, okay, what is the plan in the spring? Because again, spring weather can be extremely variable. Yeah. How much growth are you going to get? Are you willing to let it grow until the 1st of May, for example, if you're planting corn? So, yeah.
Well, if I was a farmer and I had a pallet or two of cover crop seed there, I'd be inclined to plant some of it. I'll just say that. Maybe not the whole thing or whatever, but I would certainly be inclined to plant some of it and see what happens. But again, that's the way I am. I'm committed to cover crops, so I would just do it.
Well, again, I think there is some risk because so many unknowns then, but we know it won't grow in the bag.
That's great. Yep. Chris, I see you're on. Chris, do you have some comments?
Yeah, in response to Dan there, I've been doing for the past several years doing some spring seeded cover crops ahead of soybeans. If we didn't get some rye on or it got too late. And anyway, this year we've got 2 trials that we did with PFI, and one is a oat barley mix ahead of soybeans, and we've got some data that'll be published here shortly. And then we also did about a 12-way mix. It started with oats barley and had some mustards and a few other things. Kind of tried to keep it on the cheap side, but anyway, it got some really good. You get some diversity there, and we were able to plant that like in March, and got that going, and so we got it up and growing. So we had from 6 to 8, sometimes up to 10 inches of growth on that.
What was your feeling, Chris? Did you feel it was worthwhile? I mean, I know you're a committed cover cropper. Probably not a good question to ask you. I know what you're going to say. Yeah. But what would you recommend a guy who, let's just say, never planted cover crops before? Is this something you would recommend to him, or is it just for the diehards?
I would say, and why I came up with it is a few years ago, you go to all the meetings all winter, get all hyped up, and then, everybody says, well, then you got to wait until the fall to get something going. And so I went out there and kind of researched a little, and so I just did some, and we started to see looked like a yield benefit. And on some of the trials, we had a slight yield benefit of where we did the spring seeded cover crops. So what I call it is a jump start to the soil biology. It really gets things moving. So yeah, it's showing about a 1.5 to 2 bushel increase.
Okay.
On soybeans.
Okay.
Yeah, I think something like that. And again, if a person hasn't been doing it, Steve, keep it simple.
Yeah.
Just throw some oats out there,
Right.
and it may be doing more good in that top 2 inches than we know.